In this video, I'm going to show you how to do web scraping. We're going to use C# and ASP.NET as our framework. We're going to use HTML Agility Pack, which is the main NuGet package that provides us all these tools to do web scraping. You can download the simple app that we begin with. It's just a CRUD application with an entity called products. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to go to a website and we're going to find a list of products, and we're going to use HTML Agility Pack to grab those products along with their product review or rating and store all that to our own database. And then in the second part of the video, we'll go and get data directly from an API. What we're going to do is we're going to start by adding a new service. That is where our code for web scraping will be. So I'm going to make a new folder here, and I'm going to call it Automation Service, and then I'm going to create a class and an interface for this automation service. Alright, so our automation service is just going to have one method, which is called run automation. And that's going to be an asynchronous method. So we'll return an int. The int will be the number of records that we change in our database, and that'll be wrapped in a task. And now back to the automation service. Let's make sure that it implements iAutomation service. At some point, we're going to be persisting things to a database. So let's just import our database context here with this constructor. And so our method here, just the outline of the method to get started, is going to look like this. So this is the URL that we're going after. Here's what we're going to scrape. We're going to go and get the top 100 board games from BoardGameGeek.com. We're going to grab the title, and we're going to grab the average rating. So next thing on the agenda here is to add HTML Agility Pack. So right click and go to Manage NuGet Package, and then we can just go to Browse and search for HTML Agility. And this first one here is what we need. So just go ahead and select that and then install it. Okay, so with that installed, we can go back to our automation service. And at the top here, let's add a new using statement using HTML Agility Pack. So let's begin with adding an HTTP client, and we have our URL here. And now after this, let's get the HTML document itself. We'll use the HTTP client and its method getStringAsync, and we pass in the URL. So this is how we retrieve the raw HTML string. So then what we need to do is convert that into a HTML document that HTML Agility Pack understands. We want to select every row as an item. So if I go and inspect the document, I need to analyze the HTML structure in order to know what I'm supposed to write for my XPath selection criteria. So the thing that I'm after is this thing right here. So TR with an ID of row. And if I minimize that, I can see that all of them have that same ID and they're all the same TR element. Now, since this is such a generic name, I'm actually going to write my XPath to select the whole table first, and then select this element that exists within the table. Our table is called collection table. That's what we're doing here. So if I go and I look at W3 schools, I can see the syntax. It's really not so complicated. So XPath can take a little bit of practice and getting used to. Basically, we're saying first select the table, and then from within that table, select all of these TRs with ID row underscore. We use that XPath here in this HTML Agility Pack method, select nodes. So this is going to return an HTML node collection, and if things go as planned, each HTML node is going to contain this whole TR element for each one of these games, and there are 100 of them. Just to test to see if that's working, we could set a breakpoint here. Let's also remember to wire this up, include this new service, in the dependency injection service container. And we should also create a controller. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to add a controller, an API controller, empty, and I'm going to call it automations controller. Okay, so first we're going to use dependency injection to inject that automation service, and then we're going to add one post method, create it as an async method, and we're going to call our automation service the run automation, and eventually when we're finished with it, it'll return a number of records that are changed in the database. But right now we're just going to try and trigger our breakpoint. And when we do trigger our breakpoint, we're going to check, we just want to see what we're getting back for product nodes here. Alright, so I'm going to run this. Okay, and if I just go here to this post endpoint, I can execute, and we can see that it hit our controller, and our controller is calling our run automation method. And let's just see what we have in some of these things. So here, if you hover over HTML, you'll see that it's the entire web page as a string. And then here we convert that into an HTML agility pack HTML document. This document then we can use select nodes on, and we can pass it this XPath. And here we have a count of 100 product nodes. So we know that it's working because that's the same amount of rows we expected to return from scraping this website. So we're already scraping. Now I'm going to stop this and let's get back to our code. So now we can loop through product nodes, which is this HTML node collection, and we can perform actions on each individual node. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get the product title, and we want to get the inner text of that. So let's go back to the HTML here. So we want to get these titles. We just need to get the A element and any A element that has the class primary. We can write that like this. We'll select any and all A elements that contain the class primary. And notice that we're now selecting single node instead of selecting nodes. So we're using a different method here from HTML Agility Pack. And the other difference is that we're not performing this method on the whole HTML document. We're performing it just on one individual product node. We want the inner text of that node. And we also can just go ahead and trim it to get rid of any white space. So this will return a string value for the title. The other piece of information we want to gather is this average rating right here. So we're going to try to store this as a decimal value, but of course when we scrape it from the website, it's going to be a string. So here we're doing the same idea. We want to select one single node, and here's our selection criteria. It's a TD element with class collection BGG rating. And we get the inner text of that, and we trim it. And since it's a decimal, we have to parse it. We can see that it is this TD-BG rating. Alright, so now if we run this, when we hit our endpoint, we should see the name and the rating output into our console window. So let's just go ahead and test that. And what do we see in our console? Exactly, we have the top 100 games here and their rating. Alright, so let's just wrap this up now and persist things to our database. Let's go into our models and let's add another field, a decimal field for rating. Add migration, give it a name, like product rating. Alright, and then update database. We can go back to our automation service. So if all goes well, we'll create a new product. And then outside of the loop here, we'll save the changes to the database and return the records updated total. Now if we run this multiple times, it's gonna recreate the products every time. Just before the loop here, I'm actually gonna add this snippet of code that removes any existing products. So now I'll run this, and if I go and post our automation, and so I'm triggering the automation, we can see that in the response body it says 100. That means that 100 records changed. So that's a good indication that we're probably going to get 100 products now when I ping the API products list. And that's exactly what happens. So we've got our name, we've got a rating for all of the 100 games that are on Board Game Geek's Top 100. Now, obviously, persisting things to a database is really not part of web scraping, but I just want to give you some context and show you how this can be used in the real world and how powerful it can be applied to certain scenarios. So another good way that you can extract information from websites is by checking out what kind of APIs are powering elements in the background. So for example, here on this car auction website, we could use scraping like we just did to go and grab the titles and the pricing and all this information. We could do that. But let me just show you another approach. And this isn't always feasible because websites can protect their APIs. But if I go here to inspect, and I go over here to network, and I filter fetch XHR, and I go back to the website here and I go and interact with some kind of control like this filter, you'll notice that there's some activity happening over here in your console. And what this is anytime the user interacts with a control, notice that the website doesn't reload. So if I change this year, there's no reload up here at the top. So how that's possible is an API is feeding this this table in the background. It's using Ajax. And so yeah, when we find these background APIs, we can take advantage of them. So in this case, on this car auction website, I can see that this one looks interesting. So if I go and inspect it, I can see by clicking the response what it's sending back. And I can see that it's sending back a JSON feed of every car that we see here in the table. And we have a lot of information that's very well organized and easy for us to handle programmatically. A lot easier than having to select things with XPath and being at the mercy of if the design of the website changes. Now, not all these API feeds are open. Some of them are protected. And in fact, this example right here, you wouldn't be able to use it. If you go here to headers, you can see the URL here. Now, if I open up Postman or something and I try to put this in, I'm going to get a denied response because you can see they have this timestamp and signature. These are security measures that websites employ to stop you from doing this very thing. But often the case, you have a partner that has an external system, that has an API or something like that, and you want to connect to it, and they're going to provide you authentication keys. So I'm going to show you how we can obtain that data from API feeds. Let's go back to our app, and let's create a new class, and let's call it Automation Service version 2. And this is going to implement the interface iAutomation service. And here's how our code is going to look. Let's create another folder within this called DTOs, and catfax response DTO is going to look like this. Okay, so what we're doing is we're going to use this free API. It's just a silly API for teaching programming, and I don't really know why it exists, but there is an API out there called catfax API. You can use this endpoint here, get /fax, to get a list of catfax. So I actually prefer to use Postman, so I'm just going to use Postman. catfax.ninja/fax. We're sending a GET request, so let's send that. And this is what it responds with. We can use API data by leveraging Newtonsoft JSON, which is a NuGet package used to serialize JSON response data from an API into C# objects. That's one step. The other step is that you need to have DTOs, or a DTO structure, I should say, that models exactly the way this data comes in. The wrapper class is the catfax response DTO, where we have an integer for the current page, and then we have a list of data with each item being a catfact DTO. And a catfact DTO is just the string fact and the integer length. So fact length, this is the individual catfact, and then we have this data field, which is an array of individual catfacts. And this outer whole deal is the response wrapper. But I'm really not interested in any of these other fields. I'm really not even interested in current page, but I'm just, well, okay, including that one too. We could go out and write all these other fields, and we could capture all that information as well. The only one I'm really interested in is data. Anyways, this is how our DTOs look, and this is, let's import these DTOs here, okay, and let's also add Newtonsoft JSON. We need to go here, we need to go manage NuGet packages, we need to search for Newtonsoft JSON. So let's install this one. It has 5 billion downloads. Alright, and now I can probably just use this shortcut using Newtonsoft JSON to add our statement up here at the top. Just like before, we have a URL string. In this case, it's catfax.ninja/fax. That's the endpoint we're interested in. We create a new HTTP client. We use the getAsync method of the HTTP client, and we pass that URL to it. We'll then retrieve an HTTP response message. We can ensure that it's successful. And here's where we convert that unformatted JSON blob of unuseful text into a catfax response DTO, which C# will recognize and treat as an object, and now we can do anything that we want with it. And in this case, we'll just loop through each item, each catfact, and we'll write a fact out to the console. This is just to, well, this is doing nothing, but it just keeps our method signature valid. Let's go and go to our program. Let's point to our new version 2 automation service. Same deal, let's run our application. Here's our console window. Let's go over here to run automation, and we should see a bunch of catfacts. There it is. Those are the two ways that you can gather information from external sources. It's kind of helpful to know a little bit about front end and how the DOM is structured. ChatGPT is pretty good at writing select statements. If you're thinking about building a web scraping app, check out the Nano Boilerplate so that you don't waste hours coding the app infrastructure. Instead, you can focus on writing the more important code, scraping websites, and providing unique features. I hope the explanations were clear and relatable. Good luck with your projects.